Coming up next on NewsDepth, even a pandemic can't put a stop to apple picking. And Margaret heads to Lake Erie to learn all about erosion. Why are folks so sad about this fall in Boulder? We'll tell you. Plus, we learn the history of who can vote in Politics on Point. NewsDepth is now. Voters are lining up to cast their ballots. Hello, everybody. I'm Rick Jackson. Thank you so much for joining us. And just like that, the election is upon us. The first day to vote in Ohio was October 6th, and plenty of folks took advantage of the chance. Take a look at these voters waiting in line in Cincinnati. That's some dedication to democracy. And these folks in Cleveland. Hey, is that Margaret? I dropped off my ballot this week as well. Same place, actually. And according to Secretary of State Frank LaRose, more than 2.1 million absentee ballots have been requested for the November election. That's nearly twice as many as requested for the last presidential election back in 2016. Now, the Secretary of State's an elected official in charge of elections and registering businesses across Ohio. Absentee ballots were mailed on the 6th as well, but not without a problem. Some voters in Franklin County received ballots with the wrong races on them. LaRose has directed that county's Board of Elections to notify the voters of the mistake and send them new ballots. If a voter does fill out the wrong ballot, their votes will still be counted on races that they are eligible for, including, of course, voting for president. Now, LaRose also directed local boards of elections to each have a secure drop box outside their buildings where voters can cast their ballots if they don't want to use the mail. LaRose said it is important to provide multiple ways for ballots to be returned, so it's easier for voters to participate.
Well, we want to make it easy to vote, and it is easy to vote in Ohio. By the way, 93% of Ohioans responded to a recent poll that said it's easy to vote in the state of Ohio. And again, in Ohio, absentee votes are routinely returned by mail. It's trustworthy. You can track your ballot by going to voteohio.gov. That's the official Ohio Secretary of State website, and track your ballot to make sure it's received. In Ohio, those ballots can be received up to 10 days after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked by Monday, November 2nd. So
the day after voting began in Ohio, the two vice presidential candidates sat down for a debate in Salt Lake City, Utah. Mike Pence is currently VP under President Donald Trump, while U.S. Senator for California Kamala Harris is running with former VP Joe Biden. Their spot on the ballot's especially important this year because of the ages of their running mates. Trump is 74, Joe Biden is 77. Should the president become unable to perform his duties in office because of an illness, the VP is the one designated to take over as leader of the country. Reporter Camilla Bernal has some key takeaways from the showdown between Vice President Pence and Senator Harris.
Though a notably more civil and substantive affair than last week's presidential debate, the face-off between vice presidential candidates Mike Pence and Kamala Harris was still contentious.
He interrupted me, and I'd like to just finish.
The candidates pulling no punches on key issues like climate change, foreign relations, and health care.
If you love someone who has a pre-existing condition,
Thank
they're
you, Senator
coming
Harris.
for you.
Obamacare was a disaster.
But from the start, the plexiglass barrier highlighted a huge issue of the campaign, COVID-19. Harris zeroing in on the pandemic's impact.
210,000 dead people in our country. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed.
And challenging Pence on the strategy going forward.
Today, they still don't have a plan. They still don't have a plan. Well, Joe Biden does.
Pence, however, echoing President Donald Trump's narrative of success.
He suspended all travel from China. That decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time.
In Salt Lake City, I'm Camila Bernal.
Thanks, Camilla. Now, the second debate has been canceled in part because of Mr. Trump's refusal to participate if it was virtual. Believe it or not, having a virtual presidential debate isn't unheard of. In October of 1960, John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon debated each other from afar. It was on TV. Nixon was in Los Angeles, while Kennedy was in New York City. Check out this historic footage.
Now joined for tonight's discussion by a network of electronic facilities which permits each candidate to see and hear the other. Good evening, Senator Kennedy.
Good evening, Mr. Jadell.
And good evening to you, Vice President Nixon.
Good evening, Mr. Shadell.
Debates have obviously come a long way since that was filmed, but so have the laws on who can vote. Our Nick Costell has details about that in this week's Politics on Point.
Voting is often considered our most important right as U.S. citizens, but exactly who gets that right has changed quite a bit through the years. When we elected our first Congress, the only citizens who could vote were free white men who were 21 years or older and owned land. That left out a majority of the people in the United States. In fact, in some states, less than 1% of the total population actually cast ballots. Nearly 100 years later, after the Civil War ended slavery in America, the 15th Amendment was added to the Constitution. It says federal and state governments cannot deny anyone the right to vote based on their race, skin color, or having been a slave. While this should have opened the polls to black voters, many southern states passed restrictive voting laws that kept them from voting. It wasn't until 1965, when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, that all African Americans could exercise their right to vote. The next big amendment to open up the polls was the 19th. Although women had been an important force in the history of this country, they had to fight for generations to earn the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and other suffragettes held protests, circulated petitions, and lobbied Congress to give women the vote. Finally, in 1919, the 19th Amendment was approved by Congress, and women cast their ballots for the first time in the election of President Warren G. Harding in 1920. One of the last hurdles for determining who could vote was the age limit that had been set at 21 years old way back in 1789. But when the Vietnam War started and 18-year-olds were drafted to fight, many argued that they too should be able to vote. In 1971, the states agreed to lower the limit to 18 years by ratifying the 26th Amendment. Even today, some argue that voter ID laws, which require every voter to present a government-issued ID, are just another way to leave some people out of our democratic process. Voting is not something to be taken lightly. It's a right that many of our forefathers and foremothers have fought for.
Thank you, Nick. Now, before we move on from politics, I've got a quick update on President Donald Trump's health. His doctors say he's doing well enough to return to public engagements. The Centers for Disease Control recommended that anyone with a mild or moderate case of COVID-19 should not return to work until 3 things are met. At least 10 days have passed since the president and the First Lady's symptoms first appeared. At least 24 hours have passed since last fever without the use of fever-reducing medications, and their symptoms have improved. For a severe case, they suggest waiting even longer to return to work. All right, on to agriculture now. It's apple picking season. Just like everything nowadays, the pandemic, though, has impacted how pick-your-own orchards can operate. But the apples, they don't seem to notice. Jenna DeAngelis visited a farm in Hillsdale, New Jersey to see how the harvest is going.
This one's ready.
An exciting day for cousins Devin and Gavin.
Ooh, that looks like a good one.
The pair picking the perfect apples with their moms at Demarest Farms.
Perfect fall activity.
And a fall tradition the pandemic isn't getting in the way of for this family.
Well, there are definitely places that you don't feel safe going into, but this doesn't seem to be one of them. This is, I think they're doing everything right, making it very safe and secure for everyone.
The farm is 34 acres, 20 of which are the orchard. So as you can see, there's plenty of space to stay socially distant and pick your favorite apples.
Right here we got a beautiful crop of Liberty apple.
Co-owner James Bolin walking us through the new way of apple picking, which starts with making an online reservation.
We limit to about 400 people for every hour and a half.
That's about half the number of visitors pre-pandemic.
What are some of the things we won't see this year?
Unfortunately, we have a haunted orchard at night in the month of October. We won't be doing that.
So no more hay rides?
Not for the time being, no.
When you visit, you'll drive straight up to pick your apples. Hand washing stations are available.
You're not going to touch anything else except for the apple or the bag that it's going in that we supply you with. So we're kind of strict with that. Like I said, we don't want any cross-contamination.
The farm market is open to pick up pre-packaged food, sweets, and produce. Even though business is down,
if you're a farmer, it's a livelihood. It's not a job. That's the first thing. So just being able to watch people's faces as they pick the apples or pick the peaches and enjoy themselves, that's a good feeling.
Being able to carry on a fall tradition which, despite being different, tastes and feels just as sweet. In Hillsdale, New Jersey, Jenna DeAngelis.
Thanks, Jenna. Hey, that reminds me of Ohio's own Johnny Appleseed, who crossed the state planting the fruit trees on his way. We have an entire Know Ohio all about him. We'll link it beneath this week's episode online. In more plant news, an insect in Massachusetts is putting the maple industry on watch. The spotted lanternfly is an invasive bug that attacks crops and maple trees, damaging them before harvest. Invasive means spreading a lot and causing harm to an area. Rondella Richardson has that scoop.
The spotted lanternfly is pretty, but also a problem. The insect, originally from Asia, is on the move to local towns. They suck the sap out of tree leaves and damage vineyards and fruit orchards and maple trees.
We have plenty of maple trees around here.
Yeah, that would be a shame.
We have a vine tree, and I was worried because, it is a fruit tree.
The state was notified nursery stock with spotted lanternflies or their eggs have been unintentionally imported into Massachusetts.
They found a single insect which was already dead. So a concerned citizen in Norwood contacted the state agency, Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, or MDAR.
If you see the insect, take a picture and report it to the state or town. Fortunately, they do not eliminate all greenery.
We've had discoveries in Boston last December and more recently in Milford and Norwood. Residents should look for large gray insects about 1 inch long with black spots, red underwings, or inch-long rectangular yellowish-brown egg masses.
But they don't bite.
Thanks, Rondella. The Ohio Department of Agriculture is asking Ohioans to be on the lookout for the spotted lanternfly as well. They were seen not far away, right across the state border in Pennsylvania, a little bit earlier this year. Okay, let's turn it over to our own science reporter. Margaret Cavalier headed to the shores of Lake Erie in search of a good lesson. Let's see what she's got in this week's Spot on Science.
In the summer, I like to head to the shores of Lake Erie. No, not for a dip in the water, for a walk along the beach and a hunt for sea glass. Unfortunately, I haven't had much luck. I'm more likely to leave with some smooth pebbles than a pretty piece of glass. But still, Lake Erie is a great spot to learn about weathering, erosion, and deposition. Let's start with weathering. That's the breaking down of rocks, soils, and other substances into smaller pieces, especially by wind and water. So those pebbles I found, they probably weren't always so small or so smooth. Being knocked around by the water and pushed by waves into one another resulted in their rough edges being smoothed away. Voila, weathering. Zoom out from the pebbles and we can see erosion in action. Erosion is a process of moving rocks and soil to a new location. As waves from Lake Erie hit the shore, they start to knock down soft soil and pull it away from its original place. Erosion is a particularly dangerous process for folks whose homes are located on the shore. Gravity is happy to lend a hand, and as the soil gets pulled away by the water, large chunks of the shoreline can tumble right into the lake. To keep this from happening, some communities along Lake Erie have installed what are called breakwalls or breakwaters. Those are usually large piles of rock that are not as easy for the lake to erode. Of course, all of Lake Erie is an example of erosion. During the Ice Age, the glacier that covered Ohio scooped right through the area, leaving the lake behind. You can see good evidence of it over on Kelly's Island. Check out these grooves left behind. Erosion is a pretty destructive process. Now, where there's erosion, somewhere else there has to be deposition. That is when the soil, rocks, and minerals that were eroded are dropped off, creating new landforms. It's a constructive process. So the sand on the beach is a great example. It was brought to shore by the water, making a beach and some dunes. Lots of other areas of Ohio have rich soil good for farming because it was deposited there by Ice Age glaciers. All three of these processes, weathering, erosion, and deposition, continuously tear down and build up Earth's surface. But enough with the lessons. I want to see if I can find some of that beach glass.
Thank you, Margaret. Hey, that fits perfectly with this next story. It's a big, I mean big example of weathering. A famous balancing boulder has finally fallen over. This is in Massachusetts. Supposedly, George Washington at one time tried to push the rock over, but did not succeed. The rock has become an important landmark for the folks in Holliston. A landmark is an object or a feature that's easily recognizable from a distance, and it helps you know where you are. Josh Brigadier has a story about gravity finally getting the best of the boulder. Josh?
Let's say 10 to 15,000 years.
That's right. For thousands of years, the 5-ton rock you now see leaning on its side was a balancing boulder along Route 16, a landmark in the town of Holliston, since a glacier melted and dropped it here well before anyone can remember. But sometime Monday night or early Tuesday morning, it came down.
Time and weathering. We call it that process of the rocks breaking down and deteriorating. We call it weathering.
Retired geologist and Holliston resident Carol Hildreth is taking a very close look at what has been taught in history classes, is on the town's website, even has a street named after it, and legend has it was visited by George Washington in 1789. Here's town historian Joanne Hulbert.
Coming by and seeing this large boulder, and perhaps because it was a leisurely trip and he's on the scenic road, he got off, apparently, got up here to try to push it off.
This is not like the face of the man of the mountain in New Hampshire that collapsed, so you might be wondering what we are. Could heavy machinery push this back up? The short answer, no.
I expect it's going to stay like that because I think gravity won.
Through the morning, as word spread, people stopped by to see with their own eyes what they feared they'd heard. The balancing rock is no longer balancing.
This is definitely not what we wanted to see, and it's like 2020 just keeps on giving gifts that nobody wants.
Thank you, Josh. For this week's poll, we want to know what you think the town should do about the balancing rock. Should they rebalance the balancing rock? Head to our online poll to vote either yes, it's an important landmark, or no, nature won this time. Then we want you to head outside like Margaret did and find an example of weathering, erosion, or deposition in your neighborhood. Write to us describing your observation, and bonus points if you include a photo or a drawing along with your letter. Remember though, if you're in the photo, then we need your parents to fill out a participant release form on our website so that we can share it with everybody else. That can be found on the inbox form page. So let's see the results from last week's poll. Remember, we asked you to take a look around your hometown and see if businesses in your community were closed due to the pandemic. 61% of you said yes, but not too many. Last week, we also asked you to write to us about how you could turn one of your hobbies into a career. Let's see what you had to say by opening up our inbox. Ella from Jordak Elementary in Middlefield wrote, "My hobby is to make dresses. To turn my hobby into a business, I would first send a picture to friends, and they would send my picture to someone else. When people hear about it and contact me, I would mention that my dresses can be delivered or picked up. Then finally, I would make a video about my dresses and do a little fashion show. That's how I would make my hobby into a career." Sophia from New Bremen Schools in New Bremen wrote, "If I would turn my hobby into a career, I would probably do basketball because I love playing basketball with my friends. I would probably do camps for any adults and children. I would do this because I want everyone to be able to play basketball and have fun. This would be very fun because I could also make a team of kids and a team of adults and they could play each other, adults and children. I think this would be fun because I would be helping people have fun and also I would be having fun." Sophia likes fun. Well, Luke from Meadowlawn Intermediate in Sandusky already has turned a hobby into a business. "My hobby is that I do baking. I actually have turned it into a career and I'm just a kid. My business name is Lake Erie Treats. I make tons and tons of great things like cake pops, cakes, cupcakes, and more. It started in 4-H and I liked it so much and people liked my dessert so much that we had to turn it into a business." And he sent along these tasty photos of what he's baked. That looks good. Sam from Biomed Science Academy in Ravenna is off to a good start. "I would turn my hobby of writing into a career by writing stories and articles for magazines and newspapers." Sam, this could be your first publication. And finally, Olivia from Eaton Community Schools in Eaton shared these drawings and wrote, "I would turn art into a business because I love art and I think I'm good at art, so I would enjoy selling art that I do." Nice answers, everyone. Now, for those of you who chose careers in science, this next story is for you. We're going to meet an epidemiologist in Sweden. An epidemiologist is a health expert who studies the cause of diseases and illnesses in order to figure out how to stop them or prevent them. Let's pause for a quick geography lesson first, though. Allo, welcome to the country of Sweden, located in the northern European region, known as Scandinavia. The population there, similar to that of Ohio, Sweden's inhabited by just over 10 million people, with many living in the capital city of Stockholm. Forests and lakes make for a beautiful landscape and lots of exports of wood and paper products. The country is another constitutional monarchy. Remember, that means they have a monarch, King Carl Gustaf in this case, and also a constitution. The citizens here are able to vote on their governmental leaders. Sweden is also the only European country that did not resort to a lockdown for the current pandemic. Now, Swedes are weighing their options on how to move forward as vaccines become an option. Max Foster explains.
No lockdown and few masks, if any at all. Sweden tends to avoid issuing mandates when voluntary guidelines are usually enough. All eyes now on how they handle the vaccine, and we already know their plan.
The Swedish-British pharmaceuticals giant AstraZeneca is one of the frontrunners in developing a coronavirus vaccine. If and when they succeed, adults will be advised by the health authorities here to take it, or the approved alternative, and starting with the most vulnerable. There's no real debate here about mandated vaccination.
We worked with voluntary vaccination during the last pandemic, and Sweden probably reached the highest rate of vaccination anywhere in the world.
Chief epidemiologist Anders Tegnell, known as the architect of Sweden's COVID-19 pandemic response. Children won't be advised to take the vaccine at all, at least at first, because they aren't considered spreaders of the virus.
We have very little data that they spread the disease at all, so at least in the beginning, to vaccinate children will be not the most relevant action to take. The most relevant action to take is to vaccinate the people that are really at risk, which are mainly the elderly, and people working with them in healthcare and in social care.
But members of this family aren't sure they would ever take part in another vaccination program after the last one. Their 13-year-old, who doesn't want to be named, has the chronic sleep disorder narcolepsy, which his doctor says was triggered by the swine flu immunisations of 2009. A vaccine hastily rolled out in Europe at the time has been linked to an increase in cases, leaving this family and others wary of vaccination.
After school, I don't have the energy to do stuff, so I just go home and play video games.
His father says he wouldn't take another vaccine unless there was a guarantee of compensation for side effects.
If a vaccine suddenly appears for the virus, are you likely to take it?
No.
Why not?
I'm scared of it though in the beginning, yeah. I feel I'm strong enough without it.
I think I'd take it.
Why is that?
If it's safe, then if it helps, then why wouldn't I?
Sweden's National Health Agency says all the bodies involved in developing a new vaccine are doing everything possible to prevent dangerous side effects ever happening again. Swedes have a reputation for following official advice on medication without questioning it. But even here, you'll find plenty who won't be at the front of the line for a brand new coronavirus vaccine. That raises the question of whether we'll ever be rid of this deadly and endlessly disruptive virus. Max Foster, Stockholm, Sweden.
Thank you, Max. While we wait for companies to find a safe vaccine, let's see what you all have been up to. This week's A+ award, it goes to the 3rd grade at Powers Elementary School for coming up with a creative and informative way to start their day. The 2020-2021 school year is off to a weird start, to say the least. Some of you are learning at home all the time, some of you are learning in a hybrid setting, and some of you are going back to school 5 days a week. It's hard to feel, though, like school is normal. 3rd grade students in Mrs. Fink and Mrs. Kaufman's classes decided they needed to do something to make school feel normal again. With the help of their principal, Mr. Tepner, the 2 classes recorded video morning announcements for the entire last week of September to be shown to all of the students in school and at home. The students wrote scripts for each day's announcements and rehearsed before recording them. The students used a green screen to record themselves for each segment of their show. The students researched fun facts and tidbits for each day's announcements. We are really proud of the work they've done, said Mrs. Kaufman. We think this is a great way to bring our school together and have our students at home start their day the same way we do here at school," added Mrs. Fink. The announcements cover important news, birthdays, what's happening in school, and most importantly, what's for lunch. The videos our students made really make their fellow classmates and teachers smile and laugh. It's a great way to start the day, Mr. Tepner shared. Well, maybe the third graders at Powers Elementary School have a future right here on NewsDepth. They're doing a great job of keeping school normal for e-learners and at-school learners as well. And we're proud to award them this week's NewsDepth A+. Now, last but not least, let's see what NewsCat has pawed up for this week's petting zoo. Hey there, cat. Napping again? Oh, come on. It's only episode 6. You got plenty of time. Okay, make those paws go. Much better, much better. What she's found is, it's a story about a cat being reunited with its owner after the California wildfires. Amazing. To see the full story, though, click the Petting Zoo button on our website. And thank you, NewsCat. Well, that's going to just about do it for us, but of course, we do want to hear from you. Plenty of ways to stay in touch. You can write to us. We're at 1375 Euclid Avenue, that's Cleveland, Ohio. Our zip code's 44115. You can email us at newsdepth@ideastream.org, or you can tweet us. Our handle is @NewsDepthOhio. Thanks for joining us as always. I'm Rick Jackson. We'll see you right back here next week.
NewsDepth is made possible by a grant from the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation.